How many times would you forgive somebody for lying to you? How many times would you give somebody a second chance? If you're dating somebody and they keep on doing things that make them a red flag, how much time do you think you would last together? These are the questions that I kept thinking about when I was reading The Girl from Jersey City by Jane Austen. It is a YA coming of age novel about the main character, Paul, who has been through a lot in his life. He comes from a dysfunctional family. There are events in his past and his teenage years that have molded him into the person he has become. He's constantly battling against these external circumstances and he wants to be a better person, but he suddenly finds himself in circumstances in which he ends up repeating those patterns that have turned him into a red flag, basically. And the reason I recommend this book and the reason I found it so interesting was because when I was reading it, I loved how it was not just a love story, or it was not just trying to justify the actions of the main character, but it basically gave you more in depth understanding of why people can sometimes do things which evidently even they know that it is wrong. The entire narrative was quite fascinating, and there were things and there were moments in the book which I personally struggled with coming to terms with. And I think the author wrote it in a specific way for you to actually feel that way. Like when I kept thinking from the perspective of Flora, because she is the female main character in the story, and yet there are no chapters from her perspective. But I think the reason that was kept this way is because the author wanted to show that even when there are people in your life who can be forgiving, even when there are people in your life who can be supportive, who can give you second chances, who can ignore those red flags and actually try to accept you as you are, the burden shouldn't be on them to always justify your actions. The burden should not be on them to always keep trying to help you in becoming a better version of yourself. It's in some ways, I like the fact that though Laura is such an important part of this story, she does not take up the responsibility of somehow reforming Paul, but just her presence is important enough that Paul actually does make enough efforts and does try enough of times to work on his character, work on his these weaknesses, these flaws that have developed because of the way he has lived his life. There are a couple of chapters in which his dysfunctional family is mentioned, all the incidents that he's gone through is mentioned, and it sees us like draw those connections between what are these character flaws that he has developed and where those emerged from. And that was one of the reasons why I really liked reading this book. It was quite comprehensive and descriptive, and the writing style is such that the author actually wants to show you what is happening instead of just narrating this happened and that is why he's like this happened and that is why this character behaves like this. So it was quite descriptive and imaginative as well, because some of those detailings were quite beautiful, and I constantly found myself like reading a couple of paragraphs again and again. You know, when you come across a book and you read a sentence and it resonates with you so much that you read it over and over again. So there were a couple of places in the book where I found myself doing that, and that is a part of what made this book memorable for me. I do think there are certain areas in which there is improvement needed. One of them being the book cover. I I liked the book Blur, when that is why I decided to pick the book up. But based on just the book cover, I wouldn't have. I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but even then, I think the book cover could be better. The second part of it is that the fact that all of the story is narrated from Paul's eyes or from Paul's narrative made me feel like there was a woman's perspective that was lacking in it. And it was just very centered towards the main character, and thus I found that that woman's touch was lacking from the entire story, even though it is a coming of age story, but it is also a love story. So that was one bit which was kind of unnerving for me. But you would ask this question, right? Why would somebody continue being with somebody who's evidently a red flag? Like all the incidents in his life, all the actions that he keeps on committing declare him as a red flag. And I struggled with that question honestly when I was reading this book. Like, why didn't she just leave? Like, like you come across a person and is involved in all sorts of bad things and like robberies and crime, and the company that he keeps, generally I would not date somebody like that. But why would Laura keep trying to give him those second chances? When I kept thinking about that, and it showed, like, there are some hints that are dropped in between which show that the struggle Paul goes through, as well as the efforts that he himself is trying to make to be a better person. Like, in many cases, in many incidents and many scenes that I saw, he kind of was a better person than many those around him. And there were incidents in which he actually stood up, took a stand, or actually reformed himself to some extent. So there was this possibility, this distant hope that people in love often cling to, that I can change him. I did get those vibes. And but it was a fun read for sure. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. It is the kind of book that you can just read in one sitting and enjoy. There were so many chapters in which you could see Paul and Laura gradually falling in love with each other, steadily falling in love with each other. And those chapters are narrated in a way that gives you a sense of what it means, like, to get to know another person on a deeper level or to develop feelings for them. And that prose, I would say, is actually the highlight of the book for me. In the end, I think that if you're looking for a story that you could just read in one sitting, that would be interesting enough to capture your attention, or that would leave you with certain thoughts, then I definitely recommend reading The Girl from Jersey City by Zane Austen.